Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Ahlul Nazak. I'm a student of English Department at Andalas University. This is my assessment for Indonesian culture and tourism. Here we go. Alright, in this video, I will explain you about tourism in developing countries. Introduction. For many of poor countries in the world, tourism has become a major input their development process. Although development is a concept which has many meanings, for most countries, it is seen as being essentially a measure of economic process. As such, most development indicators centers on change in the gross domestic product, gross national income, or per capita income. Despite these problems, it is still used as a major means of making relative assessment of levels of development between countries. Okay, the next slide is economic development and economic growth. Economic growth is a quantitative measure of increase in GPN and or GNP per capita. Economic development, on the other hand, has a much wider interpretation. It's an attempt to see how economic growth has actually been used to improve the general living standard and well-being of the people of a country. One would expect economic growth, if used for economic development, for example, to facilitate improvement in the provision of health service, education, infrastructure, and the like. The obvious point is what without economic growth, development can only take place in the presence of aid or other internal donor contribution. Alright, there are perhaps six major features which are common to developing countries. The first, they have a limited manufacturing sector and are heavily dependent on a range of agricultural export to sustain their economies. There might be potential to expand the economies into the minerals all meaning, but often there is lack of research both in capital and expertise to do so. Many are highly dependent of the export of primary product. In some cases, this can be very narrowly based, such as on export of tropical fruit or sugar, which have a limited comparative advantages on the international market. Many of these exports also faced with tariff and quota barrier in the main importing countries. Number three, most require a large volume of import from the industrial developed countries. This has an effect of them having to buy at international market price over which they have no control. Example, oil imports. Rising import price can generate inflationary pressure causing economic instability. Number four, as a many are major exporter of basic primary product, example coffee, tea, and sugar, they are subject to export price which are determined by international market and which can fall or rise on the years to the years basis. Number five, in order to overcome the most several fluctuation, there are international commodity agreements such as coffee, cocoa, and sugar, which attempt to build a buffer stock to ease the worst fluctuation in international price. But in many cases, this has not helped to protect the export aiming of the countries. These economic problems are further exacerbated by other pressures. Number six, most have weak infrastructure and development manufacturing sectors, high human employment levels, and a chronic shortage of capital. This defines combine to provide a very poor base for economic development and diversification. And the last, many have a very high rate of growth of population, which the economic growth rapidly rising population can absorb. Whatever economic gains have been made by having to unitil utilize the gains not for investment in productive capacity, but simply to feed more people. Alright, and the next explanation, tourism in development. In the intermediate post-war period and crescent from 1950 onward, tourism as an international activity has been dynamic, although the international oil crisis in early 1970 and also later recession into the early 1980 affect growth trends. Tourism recovered quickly. The reason of the growth in tourism were flower, able economic and social determinant of demand. For most developing countries, tourism often a growth prospect with most other export did not. This is a very usually features which obviously make tourism relative to other export and attractive option for many developing countries. Tourism trends to be a employment intensive activity, although this generalization does not hold true in a very country. Because tourism is essentially a service activity, it trends to create more jobs per unit of investment than other more capital intensive activity. Job creation is one of the most important economic and political necessity in developing world, and many governments support tourism in order to create employment opportunities. Using these natural advantages as an input to tourism often create very low entry costs for many countries. Although of course these costs will increase as tourism number increase. It is sometimes claimed that because a country will attempt to reflect its own traditional and culture in tourism development, there is a possibility to create a tourism industry which reflect local rather than international standard. As many of developing countries are distant for main generation countries, air transport development have been critical in the growth of international tourism. All this trend the increase and it appears that most developing countries can look forward to a growth in demand for international tourism. To create a tourism industry which reflect local rather than international standard. So, for example, instead a concert hotel with a little roof, in some countries the alternative might a wooden structure with a headed roof. The last explanation. Conclusion. Although in the world, the biggest proportion of visitors still travel within Europe and within USA, Canada and Mexico, and between these two regions there is a definite growth in long-haul travel. As a people become culture more curious, have greater levels of disposal income and with attend development in air transport. There is a very reason to believe that this trend will increase. Faced with a growing demand for visit to their countries, the ones must be on the developing countries to plan for their tourism sector to ensure that the disadvantages are managed and minimized and potential advantages are safe. I think that's all what I can tell you for tourism in developing countries in this video. Don't forget like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.